Now that we've got the hard part out of the way, the book title, let's go down here and look at primary author and contributor. If you're like me, you want to pay attention and make sure you put these fields in correctly. I've literally messed it up so many different ways. You'll see it says first name and last name. Now, this is first name and last name you want to be known as. Amazon will collect legal information for payment later. Now, next, down to the description. I've already wrote this up. And this, you want to have a good description like this, and I'll go into the individual elements. Well, it's a good description just because it's yours, Jerry. Yes, that's what I mean. A good description. It's good because I wrote it and I'm good, so therefore it's good. There, it's that simple. I hit backspace instead of delete. I'm done. Okay, here we go. Into the description. Please minimize your face. I can't see it. Okay, take my face out of it. So here's the book description. The description is one of the key selling points you get on a page. For example, if I take you over to this and I click on the book, one of the very few areas I have to sell you, this is where I get to essentially sell you. This is a very important part of the process. Once you've got the title down, and if you've obsessed about that for months before you ever started writing the book, and then you took 3 more months, and often then, if you're like me, you'll just throw the description in last minute. But this, I've learned, is very important. This is where you get to sell. And I start off now with an ask immediately. And I try and emphasize that there's a story in there because we associate the idea of story with fun. And I like to just ask now. Would you like to hear the complete story, the completely honest story of my life in my new autobiography named Speaker Meeting 2017? Will you join me? Will you join me to unlock an autobiographical experience you will never forget? I created this to share my experience, strength, and hope with all my addictions in candid detail with the, I used hope in here twice. So with the goal, or I can arrange this however I want to. This is obviously an artistic experience. So I start off with an ask. And I might even shorten it a little bit. Will you join me? There's several different ways you can craft this, essentially. I like to start off with an ask. You see, when I've written a lot of these previous descriptions, I started off things like this. If you want to be successful with Facebook ads and marketing, you might love this book. That's a pretty good way to do it. But I've got someone in front of me who's potentially going to purchase or take their valuable time to read. I want to ask them if they're going to do that. So the first sentence essentially is the whole critical part of this description. And I essentially like these 2 different elements in here. So they're kind of repetitive in that sense. So I like the beginning of this. Will you join me? I'll put, will you join me in hearing or in experiencing the honest story, the true story, or something? Will you join me? How do you put the perfect description? There's no perfect science to it. So what I can do is I actually kind of like this second sentence, so I can just take the first sentence out. I started this with 2 different asks. I wrote this during different periods. So the nice thing is to be able to have this written and then go back and to be able to go into it. Sometimes when you write it at the time, it will sound good, but then when you look at it again, it'll sound ugly. Will you join me in an autobiographical experience will you experience the story of my life in this autobiographical experience you will never forget. Now, that's a big promise, and a lot of hype and sensationalism is likely to be what you'll want to include in your description. How disappointing is it when someone says, this book is going to change your whole life, and oh my God, this is going to be the best thing you've ever read, and you open the book up and you're like, God, this is ordinary. Now, what if they'd set the standards a little bit lower instead of saying an autobiography? What if I just put a bunch of sales crap in here? What if I just was honest about it? Will you join me in, will you let me tell you the story of my life in addiction, depression? Would you, here we go. So this is the way to do this. So it's about the journey. Will you join me in my journey, in my life's journey through addiction, depression, and disaster into the life I live today in recovery, hope, health, and service. There, now that's a full description of everything I want to accomplish in the book, and there's no exaggeration, it's simply stating the facts. Will you join me through? Is it in or through? Will you join me? Will you experience? Will you read? Now the will you read, how about that? That is the ultra simple ask. Will you read my life's journey through addiction, depression, and disaster into a beautiful life, into my beautiful life today in recovery, health, and service. Beautiful. Now that summarizes what I hope to help with. So these things, addiction, depression, and disaster. I don't know if disaster is quite accurate. So you see the main area I work on this description is this very beginning. This is where I put the majority of my effort. After that, it's just a simple experience of sharing essentially the facts after that. So even though I wrote this description earlier and I wrote it earlier, I've iterated this description several times because when you look at an Amazon listing on here, you've just essentially got this first sentence or two to sell someone on it. So it really needs to communicate everything in a very simple format. And then what I'm asking them to do is read. Essentially, if someone's sitting right here, what I want them to do is read. So therefore, the ask should be direct. Will you read? What is it what am I asking them to read? My life's journey. What are 3 words that describe your life's journey? Addiction, depression, and disaster. And I could even go perhaps better than disaster through addiction, depression, and loneliness would be most accurate. Through addiction, depression, and loneliness. Through that, into my beautiful life today. Why don't I just take out into my life? I think beautiful describes the transformation to go from addiction, depression, and loneliness into my beautiful life today in recovery, health, and service. In the first sentence, then, I've clearly set up the expectations for this book. It's just my life's journey. It's not better than anyone else's, not worse than anyone else's. If you're interested in reading about addiction, depression, and loneliness, and you can identify with that, then you can see the book's relevant. If you want to go through essentially that journey into the beautiful life of recovery, health, and service, then in the very first sentence, I've got that whole thing down there. Then from there, all I do is simply explain further. And this is essentially where if someone's hooked by the first sentence, you can potentially get them to read more down here and essentially fully make the sale. So you really want to fully make the sale over here, and I'll paste this in here just in case that's out. So once you've got the first sentence in, which I think ask ask someone, take the action you want to right away. And if they say no, that's fine. Most everyone is going to say no. But some people respond really well to just asking it. Will you read? Speaker, and I could put the book title in there, but I don't know if that's necessary because you got the book title. It's just simple to just say, will you read about? Don't even need to throw in about. Will you read my life's journey? And I could even put the story, but my life story. Well, how about that? I like the word story. So my life, will you read my life story? Or I could put the story of my life. Will you read the story of my life through addiction, depression, and loneliness into a beautiful life today in recovery and service? There, the whole thing, all simplified into one sentence.